light of the gallery, I rise to make a brief contribution to this bill, and I'd like to start by thanking all those in the gallery, and especially those who came today to join us on the steps of Parliament. Don't much like rallies myself, Mr Deputy Speaker, but it was good to see so many there at such short notice, and I thank them all for the effort they made to come down and join us at such short notice and for such a long trip for some, and I'd like to acknowledge their presence now. Mr Speaker, rise to state my opposition to this bill once again, the Statutes Amendment Mineral Resources Bill. I have previously stated my opposition to this bill during the election campaign when I drove farm door to farm door with the former Shadow Minister for Agriculture, David Ridgway, from the other place, and we visited tens and tens of farmers from across and all over the peninsula and stated the party opposition to this bill. We jointly trumpeted our success in stopping the passage of this bill in the upper house of the previous parliament, and we jointly decried the unfair provisions of the bill which we suggested would affect the farmers' livelihoods and mental health. We promised more, Mr Deputy Speaker, more consultation and more favourable legislation for our core constituency. That promise, I would argue, exists in written form on the GPSA website signed by the former Shadow Minister for Agriculture. Mr Speaker, I also stated my opposition to this bill numerous times in the party room in the past 18 months. We, that being my colleagues, the member for Carvel, Davenport, MacKillop, and the Honourable Terry Stevens and Dennis Hood from the other place, have presented a plethora of amendments seeking out compromise for the betterment of the Liberal Party. Mr Speaker, I would submit to this House that we have gone above and beyond in an attempt to find a palatable compromise. Indeed, some of the options that we presented to the party room would have been exceedingly difficult to sell as genuine progress to the constituents of Narungga, the great people we see in the gallery tonight. Exceedingly difficult, Mr Deputy Speaker. Nonetheless, we presented those amendments, those genuine attempts at compromise, and they were voted down by the majority of the party room, which is how we find ourselves in this position tonight. Indeed, the most sensible amendment we presented in seeking out compromise was one that triggers an independent review of the Mining Act, and I note the introduction of a bill by the member for Frome doing just that this afternoon. Mr Speaker, both sides of this debate support that measure. Both sides view the Mining Act as outdated or insufficient to their needs and regard measures introduced in neighbouring jurisdictions as far superior. Our party, in my view, should have the courage to provide a solution that is desired by both the mining industry and the agriculture industry, not to push through the bill coveted by no one. Finally, Mr Speaker, I have opposed this bill in this chamber previously and publicly in my community, and I do so again today. I have had a consistent position throughout this debate, and my position today should come as a surprise to no one. No meaningful strides have been made on compromise, and as such, my position remains unchanged. Regarding the merits of the bill, Mr Speaker, I wish to make two things clear right from the outset. Firstly, farmers have no desire whatsoever to wrest the ownership of the minerals away from the Crown. Contrary to the views of the member for Torrens, they appreciate the need, the member for West Torrens, I should say, pardon me, they appreciate the need for the benefit of mining to flow through to the community through royalties and, by and large, are amongst the most patriotic South Australians one could possibly find. Often, critics of the push to give freehold landowners improved rights portray some sort of veiled push to transfer the ownership of minerals from the Crown to private citizens. That could not be further from the truth, Mr Speaker. It is a transparent push to allow farmers to continue to operate their business free from government intervention and intrusion. Indeed, by interpreting the Crown, by interpreting the situation as Crown ownership, meaning automatic access, then essentially the ownership of those minerals has already been transferred to private enterprise. The ownership of those minerals is already vested in private enterprise. For some reason, we are content to have the ownership of those minerals essentially vested in, often foreign-owned mining companies, but use that against supporting local farming business. Secondly, the failure to act in support of our farmers is a complete abdication of Liberal values in my view. The Liberal Party that I signed up to believes in individual freedom and free enterprise, where farmers and freehold landowners are operating successful, viable, profitable, generational private enterprise. They should be empowered to continue that operation free from fear of government intervention. The Liberal Party, since its inception, has been operating under the charter of reducing the impact that government has on the daily lives of its constituents. The current legislative and regulatory system supports a significant burden on the lives of individuals, so much so that the uncertainty over the family home and income that supports that home is causing a proliferation of mental health issues. It is implausible, as I said in my second reading speech in this place, that a profitable, generational metropolitan cafe would receive a knock on its door with the message that it had a certain number of days to vacate the premises. This hypothetical door knocker would be from an alternate, larger private enterprise, maybe a car yard for example, and their justification would be that the government wants the increased payroll tax revenue that comes with their enterprise and therefore it is being prioritised. That just would not happen in metropolitan Adelaide, yet it is happening everywhere in regional South Australia. What is the increased short-term government revenue that justifies this? Clearly the difference between the short-term difference, I should say, Mr Speaker, between mineral royalties and farm revenue is enough to justify it, but I think we all agree in this place that the cafe and the car yard would not be. Business, all business, farmers, miners, the local IGA, cafes, should be empowered to operate in perpetuity for as long as they wish until they choose not to. That is free enterprise. That is what the Liberal Party values say we believe in. Mr Speaker, the custodians of the less than 5% of arable land in this state, that is all that remains with ever-increasing urban sprawl, know what they would like to see. The precedent already exists interstate. The former Liberal Queensland government, under leadership of Campbell Newman and the relevant Minister Jeff Seeney, instituted a new act titled the Regional Planning Interests Act, which effectively segregated parts of their state according to their agriculture fertility. The hoops through which a prospective mining company must jump became progressively more difficult the more lucrative that the ground became. This Act delivered on a commitment to protect prime agricultural land and provide greater power to landowners in negotiating with resource companies. An eerily similar commitment, I would argue, Mr Speaker. This is exactly what South Australian landowners desire, a promise to protect prime agricultural land and leverage while negotiating with resource companies. We currently have the absurd situation in South Australia in which someone who owns even a small general farming zone block, an 8-hectare block to use an example I'm familiar with, will apply for planning approval which will not be granted in order to protect diminishing agricultural land, but vast open-cut mines will be approved. Owners are forbidden from building a small house on a general farming zone land because the footprint is regarded as so precious that to allow such development would jeopardise our food production areas, but we allow mining companies open slather. It is exceedingly difficult to reconcile those two things, Mr Speaker. But, Mr Speaker, it gets easier for the government because in an effort at compromise, both SACOME, the South Australian Chamber of Mines and Energy, and GPSA, the Grain Producers of South Australia, and I should include the Yorke Peninsula Landowners Group, who are present in the gallery today and who I have worked especially closely with, have managed to come up with an agreement. SACOME, GPSA and YP-LOG agree that the 1971 Act needs reform. It is 48 years old and outdated in a lot of ways. They both agree that the best way to proceed is by way of an independent review, conducted by an independent umpire who can consider frameworks that exist in other jurisdictions, impacts on each industry, and any other related matters. Wonderful news, I would argue, Mr Speaker. These industries who have been at loggerheads for an extended period and who at different times it seemed would never be able to reach an agreement have managed to miraculously do so. Surely an easy out for the government was to give both industries what they want and get to work. Incorrect, Mr Speaker. The party room did not see fit to grant the obvious solution. A bewildering decision in my view, Mr Speaker, and one that I can't accept, which is why I stand here today disagreeing with the bill. From my perspective at least, where both predominantly affected parties agree on a solution, then it is best to adopt that solution. Everyone wins in that situation. I will continue my pursuit for an independent review of the Mining Act on behalf of the mining and ag sector into the future and look forward to working with the member for Frome to deliver that. I'd like to quote the words that I received from GPSA late last week, which summarises their point of view. I quote GPSA CEO Carolyn Rhodes. "The bill as it stands leaves many issues unresolved for our state's farming community. It fails to meaningfully address the land access conflicts arising from the current law, and I believe we can and must do better to strengthen the rights of farmers. That's why GPSA will continue to seek further amendments to the bill while pushing for an independent review into the legal framework governing mining activity on agricultural land. GPSA believes that South Australian farmers are at a distinct disadvantage compared to their interstate counterparts. We should be taking best practice models from Queensland, New South Wales and Western Australia in resolving land use conflicts arising from mineral exploration and coal seam gas activity. This will need a whole-of-government approach to planning and environmental protection, of this natural resource, recognising that prime agricultural land cannot be replaced. South Australia has such a limited area suitable for cropping based on soil type and rainfall, and so it naturally follows that this scarcity should be accounted for when legislating rights for private mining or exploration companies over the rights of landowners who want to continue farming. We must address the imbalance in the land access framework arising from the current mining law." End quote. I'd also like, now that we've heard from GPSA, to take the opportunity to debunk some of the claimed benefits to landowners briefly in this contribution. There are three that I'd like to particularly touch on at this point. Firstly, the increase in legal advice from $500 to $2,500. $2,500 will get farmers an exceedingly limited, perhaps an initial consult at best, legal advice. We have the situation where a small family-owned business is operating year to year and they get a knock on the door with someone saying they have to leave, and the financial burden falls upon them to retain a lawyer and convince the court otherwise. All they get in this fight to continue their life is a measly $2,500. It's absurd in my view, Mr Speaker. I would argue that it would also be the easiest money that the lawyer will ever make. They take the $2,500 and offer the initial advice that there is no precedent for the farmer to win the case. 100% of the cases have been found in favour of the miner, and the best thing to do is to start moving the family and finding other work. Easy work if you can get it. Secondly, Mr Speaker, I'd argue that the separation distances that do increase from 400 to 600 metres, I do acknowledge that. It is true for high-impact activities, but it is also true that for low-impact activities, the distance will be reduced to 200 metres. The unfortunate reality is that if those low-impact activities uncover a mineral deposit, then it is a matter of time until there is a mine in your backyard. Finally, that there is an increased compliance enforcement measures. That there is increased compliance enforcement measures introduced for the department to police. It is the evidence of constituents of mine that the department have proven to be failures in policing mining regulation. The conflict between promoter and regulator of mining, which is currently both roles that the department performs, has proven to be, in the evidence of my constituents, an insurmountable challenge. The fear from my community is that giving greater power to the department will not give them greater cause to use it, and according to constituents, they are unwilling to use the current power to regulate, let alone any further. Those are just three examples of claimed benefits for landowners. I'm sure YP-Log would be able to articulate further debunks themselves. As this bill progresses, we will watch now what happens in the upper house and what amendments may come, if any, from the debate, and also in due course the form and content of the phase 2 of reforms that the Minister has indicated in the past he believes are necessary. I'm sure that members of the illustrious other chamber, particularly those on the crossbench who may have picked up the community sentiment quicker than some of my colleagues, will be eager to move amendments to this bill. I look forward to those amendments coming to the party room for further debate and hopefully for widespread support. If those efforts fail to garner support from the other place, or if they fail to come at all, then I look forward to taking the Minister for Mining up on his commitment for a second tranche of mining bill reform. Ultimately, this is an outdated act that needs significant modernisation for both sectors to achieve their greatest possible potential. It is with great optimism that I look forward to working with the Minister on the next tranche of reform. Hopefully we have the ambition and foresight to tackle the challenge of instituting the change that is needed to protect regional people. Similarly, I look forward to working with the Minister for Planning, the member for Schubert, in developing a planning law solution. It needs his support, and I've raised this issue with him in the past and will continue to do so. Plainly and clearly, the most recent precedent instituted by a Liberal government is protection of prime agricultural land through planning law measures. I look forward to his support in instituting similar systems to the ones found in Queensland and New South Wales, and I also look forward to working closely with the Minister for Agriculture in seeking out a solution. We have an obligation to support an industry whose benefit to our great state has been so long-standing that we only need to look down at the carpet in this place to see the clump of wheat and to get a glimpse of its importance. If I fail to garner support from those people, which I'd like to think would not be the case, then I would like to indicate at this place that I will be taking steps to further enhance the possibility of gaining an independent review. Ultimately, this is an effort at compromise for both sides, an elusive compromise which has been agreed to by each industry. I feel compelled to attempt to give them what they both desire, And if this bill passes, then I will bring back to the House, as I said earlier, the necessary steps to support an independent review. I would look forward to taking another attempt at urging all here to support the compromise measure endorsed by all parties affected. Thus, with great disappointment, Mr Speaker, I vote against the bill before us today on behalf of constituents and in support of my firm belief that an independent review must occur for the benefits of this state as a whole. Only the results of that review, undertaken at arm's length of the government and comprehensively done, can dictate direction of meaningful reform. I will continue to fight for the constituents in Narungga. That's what I was elected to do, and it is what I will continue to do for as long as the voters in Narungga see fit to elect me. Thank you very much.
The member for MacKillop.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, I rise today and speak in relation to the Statutes Amendment, my Mineral Resources Bill 2018. Consistent with my speech I delivered in the House last year, I rise again to highlight my opposition to this bill in its current form. I wish to reiterate and support of the concerns raised by my colleagues, the member for Narungga, the member for Cavell and the member for Davenport on this matter. I thank my Liberal government for the freedom to express my views on this matter. A preface for my position on the bill was strong appreciation that both mining and